Working on our old ditch witch, trying to get it started, but you can see we have dripping gas coming out of the carburetor. It's actually coming out of the air filter and the muffler. So sitting overnight, all the gas from the tank, gravity filled up the carburetor and then filled it right up. So we're going to take this apart. More than likely the float is stuck, so I figured I'd do a quick video on that. Alright, so I got the carburetor off and I'm going to take this guy apart and see what's going on. But like you saw earlier in the video, if you have gas that's coming out of your air filter, your muffler, or any place that can find its way out, usually that means you got something going on with the float. Either the float has a hole in it, or if it's a plastic float, they sometimes crack, especially if they get moisture in there, and with the cold weather, it'll get in there and it'll crack them. This is an old carburetor, so I'm assuming this is brass. I don't think I've ever been inside of this before that I can remember. If it was a long time ago. So yeah, so you got something going on with that, or something's going on with the needle valve, and it's not stopping the gas from filling up. So I'm not the greatest artist in the world, but I just kind of want to show you what's happening with this. Basically, you got your gas tank, your carburetor, and your air filter are lower than the gas tank. So basically what's going to happen is any kind of liquid wants to find natural level. So I drew a little slack tube here. Just picture this as being a clear tube. Let's say it could hold up to 16 ounces of water. If you were to put 8 ounces of water in this tube and everything was level, basically this would fill up with water. That would be your 8 ounces of water, and it would find level. You wouldn't have water up here and then some down here. I mean, if you're holding it crooked or whatever, it'll do different things. But again, if this is in a level position, you fill it up with water, it's always going to find natural level. So with that being said, that's what's going on when you got your gas tank. And this is my attempt to draw the needle valve. So as the gas comes in here, it starts to fill up the carburetor. The float's supposed to get to a certain point, and then this needle valve's supposed to plug it, and now you got plenty of gas. As your machine's running, you're using gas. The float's going to change, obviously. This is going to open back up, allow more gas in. So more than likely what happened is this float, again, either got some kind of hole in it or whatever, so it's filled up and it's waterlogged, so it can't do its job. It can't move and it can't plug your hole. Or this needle valve is bad. Sometimes they get from sitting, some of them are like a hard rubber on the end, and they'll get gunked up, and then they won't make a good seal. So usually it's usually one or the other. But like I said, we're going to take this apart and we'll find out. But so that same thing happens with the gas. If you don't have a valve, or if you have a valve and you don't shut it off, the gas is going to keep coming. It's going to fill up the carburetor, and it's going to keep going because it's trying to find level. So chances are it's going to fill up the carburetor first and start spilling out wherever it can. And with the air filter being lower than the gas level as well, depending on how much gas you have in the tank, if you only had a little bit of gas in there, eventually it probably would have leveled out down here. But anyhow, that'll keep filling up right until it starts pouring out of your air filter, your muffler, or wherever it wants to go to next. So that's just an explanation of what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and tear this apart and we'll see what's going on. Alright, so far what I see here is the float seems to be working properly. I don't feel any water sloshing around in there, and this is an old brass float, so they're soldered. I mean, over time sometimes the solder does get weak and allows gas to get in there, but doesn't feel like it is. Next step would be to take this pin out here and take this float out and put it in a bowl of water and see if it's filling up with water, see if you get any bubbles, that kind of thing. I'll probably do that, but I'm pretty convinced there's no hole in there. But this has been sitting on the bench for a couple nights, so it's very possible that whatever was in there could have leaked out depending on how I had this set on the bench. So we're definitely going to check that. I don't know how well this is going to focus, but inside of here is your needle valve. I'm going to stop for a second and see if I put my my flash on, if you can see that better. Okay, yeah, it seems better. So, get this gasket out of the way. As I'm lifting that float up and down, you should be able to see that needle valve right there. And that seems to be going up and down with no resistance. It doesn't seem like it's sticky or anything like that. But as this float lifts up, it fills up with gas. At some point, the float's going to stop. Doesn't want to focus. And as much gas as you get in that float bowl might not be enough to push this up where it's making a seal if that needle valve is in rough shape. So again, we got to pop our pin out here. This float will come off, and underneath here we'll see what's going on in there and clean it up. I got to go and get some carbon choke cleaner. But in order to adjust this float, I mean, it seems like it's pretty much closing at the level position. Certain carburetors sometimes are in different positions to make that seal, and the only way to fix that, again, I haven't had this one apart before, but you actually got to take this metal tab in here. Again, this camera's not focusing, but you actually take that and you actually bend that, and that's how you make that adjustment to make this float actually go higher, or if you didn't want it to go up as high, you want it to go lower, you bend it the other way. So that's actually how you adjust these. Alright, we're going to go ahead and check this float for any leaks that it may or may not have. I just got an old water jug I cut in half or thirds or whatever, and filled it up with tap water, put the float in there, and just put something heavy on it to keep it down there. In this case it was a screwdriver, and basically you're just going to look for little tiny bubbles that pop up. If there was a hole in it and the float is filled with air, obviously the water would try to get in and it would push out the air that's in there, causing the bubbles. So far I'm not seeing anything, but what I'm going to do, I got to run and get carbon choke cleaner anyway. I'm going to clean this up. I don't really see anything that stood out saying why this thing wasn't closing, but I'm going to clean it up. I don't have a rebuild kit, so I'm not going to rebuild it. I'm not going to get involved in the jets and stuff, but I am going to clean them up with some carbon choke cleaner. If I feel it's necessary, I'll take my whatchamacallits here, my pipe cleaners, and clean out the jets a little bit. There's a bunch of different sizes here. These are like little files, so you have to be careful when you use these. You don't want to make the holes bigger than they're supposed to be. You'll end up with more problems. So if you feel it's necessary, or if you look in the jets or whatever and you see some gunk buildup or whatever, I would try the cleaner first, and if you feel like you have to ream it out a little bit, just do it as little as possible. But while I'm headed out to the store to get some carbon choke cleaner, we'll let that sit in there, and if it's taken on water the time I get back, I'll know. Alright, that float popped right back up, so that tells me right there it didn't fill up with any water. There's definitely nothing in there, so I don't think there's an issue with the float. So at this point I cleaned up the carburetor. Like I said, I don't have a rebuild kit, and last time I ran this machine, though it was a couple years ago, it actually ran flawlessly, so I don't really want to mess with anything I don't have to. I cleaned up the jets. The fluid was coming out the way it should. I don't see anything gummed up in there. I cleaned up the linkage. The only thing I could think of at this point is the needle valve wasn't completely making for one reason or another. Could have been a chunk of, varnish in there from old gas or whatever, and from me taking it off the ditch witch and having it on here and banging on it and everything else, it could have broke free. So that's my hope. What I don't want to do is start bending on the tab right yet. I want to put it back together and give it a shot, because once you start adjusting these, sometimes you've got to take it apart 2 or 3 or 4 times to get it just right, because when you make these adjustments by bending the tab, they're very, very minor adjustments, and I've never done them on this carburetor, to be quite honest with you. This is actually a little bit different than ATV carburetors that, if you watch any of my other videos, you've seen me work on those. This needle valve usually has a little, I don't know what to call it, but a little rectangular shaped piece of wire on the top of it, and that actually hangs on the tab. So this is definitely, a little bit different. But that being said, I'm going to go ahead and put it back together, and I'm going to see what happens. Okay, I got the carburetor back installed. So far so good. I don't see anything leaking out of the carburetor. I definitely need a new gasket kit for this at some point. Seems like I'm getting a little bit out of that gasket, but anyhow, it's not dripping out of there. It's been sitting for about 10-15 minutes so far, and nothing's coming out of the air filter or the exhaust. So I think we're good. I hope we're good. I'm going to go ahead and give it a whirl and see if it'll start.